We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
Our trip proceeds smoothly enough, but as we almost reach our destination, we encounter the most severe turbulence any of us has ever experienced. After some truly gut-wrenching, terrifying, frightful moments, we somehow managed to land safely on the gentle slopes of the 18th century Commonwealth. As we all breathe a sigh of relief, thanking our lucky stars that we're still alive, the captain comes on and informs us she has good news and bad news. The good news is, despite the obvious malfunction in our vehicle, we have managed to land safely. The bad news, we're 300 years in the past. We don't have the technology to repair our vehicle. So the captain informs us we are all now permanent residents of this 18th century agricultural paradise. As you sit here stunned, thinking to yourself, this isn't the trip I signed up for. And as you begin to wonder how you're going to acclimate to life in the 18th century, I have a very important question for you. How many of you will easily find a job in your current line of work? You see, in the agrarian age, there were no software developers or executives or managers, telemarketers. There were no computer programmers. There weren't even professional athletes. All of these jobs are products of the industrial age and simply didn't exist in the agrarian age. It is in this moment that you suddenly realize you're not just in a different time or place. You are in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. Well, believe it or not, this is exactly where we find ourselves today, with the very sudden and very rapid emergence of the digital age. If you travel a lot, and you went through the Denver airport several years ago, you may recall there was a very thoughtful ad campaign from the University of Denver's Business School. And one of those thoughtful ads went something like this: the top 10 jobs of 10 years from now don't exist today. It turns out we do not have to engage in a thought experiment. We don't have to step into a time machine to suddenly find ourselves in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. All we have to do is be residents of the early 21st century. We are on the threshold of a completely new business reality for which I would suggest to you most organizations today and their business leaders are almost completely unprepared. The signs are all around us. As a matter of fact, they are hidden in plain sight. But the business leaders of most organizations cannot see them because they have been trained and socialized to view the world of business through the social lens of a 19th century management architecture that is rapidly losing relevance in a 21st century world. They feel it. They may not see it, but they feel it. And the reason they feel it is today's managers are confronted by an unprecedented and very difficult challenge. And that challenge is this: the world is changing much faster than their organizations. And all signs are is that the pace of change is only going to get faster and leave their organizations more and more behind. Nobody thinks the pace of change is going to slow down anytime soon. We now live in a permanently fast-forward world, which is why I call this new world that we find ourselves in the Wiki world. Ever wonder what Wikipedia means? What the Wiki means in Wikipedia? Wiki is the Hawaiian word for quick or fast. And if your organization is going to thrive and survive in the 21st century post-digital age, your organization better be designed to move fast. That's a problem in the 19th century management architecture because it's by design to move slow. We have been suddenly thrust into this new world with its new set of rules by the unprecedented combination of three factors. The first we've been talking about, accelerating change. The second is escalating complexity. And you're hearing this word more and more in the business literature, complexity, complexity. The world's getting more complex. Business leaders are feeling that, but they don't understand the implications of living in a more complex world. You see, all throughout the industrial age, the 19th century management architecture worked well because it was designed to handle what we could call issues of complication. Now, issues of complication came about because when we moved from the agrarian to the industrial age, all of a sudden we're making all these machines, they have thousands of moving parts. We've designed our organizations as if they're machines. And if you don't think we haven't, look in your organization chart and tell me that's not a mechanical schematic. We think we can manage humans as we can parts of machines. Issues of complication work like this. When something goes wrong, we look across the thousands of moving parts, and we have to find the 4 or 5 that are driving the problem. Once we find those, if I'm the leader, what I can do is I can assign problem 1 to your department, problem 2 to your department, problem 3 to your department, and so forth. And I'll give you a clear message. Do your job and stick to your job. And here is a big phrase of 20th century management. Do your part. If everybody does, how often have you heard it? Everybody does their part, we put it all together, all will be well. That's how you deal with issues of complication. And you know what? It worked. It worked for over a century. A central leader could put things together, could send out messages like, stick to your own job, stay out of the other person's business. Today, what's so important about escalating complexity, it has changed the fundamental nature of basic business problems. Because now when we look across not the thousands, but the millions of moving parts and find the 4 or 5 that are driving the problem, we can't divide the labor anymore. You see, the only way you can solve a complex problem is you have to come up with holistic solutions. You can't solve one particular issue out of the presence of the other 4 or 5. They must all be handled together because complex problems are highly interrelated. And we are now living in a highly interrelated world. And so if you're going to thrive and survive in this new Wiki world, your organization better be designed to think and act holistically. That's a problem for the 19th century management architecture because it is designed to be functionally fragmented. The third element in this unprecedented combination is the one that makes it truly unprecedented. Because you see, you could argue that we've had accelerating change before. We've had what felt like escalating complexity before, not in any of our lifetimes. It happened at the start of the industrial age, which felt like a faster and more complex world compared to those living in the agrarian age. The third factor, however, has never existed before in human history and is truly unprecedented. The third factor is the real game changer. And that third factor is this: ubiquitous connectivity. Never before in human history have we lived in a world where any one of you in this room can work directly and effectively with anybody else on the internet without going through a central organization. And you, together with your colleagues that you find in this hyper-connected world, will probably work faster, smarter, and less expensively than centralized counterparts. We now live in a hyper-connected world, a world in which for the first time again in human history, the phenomenon of mass collaboration is not only possible, it's practical, and it is pervasive. And it's only going to become more practical and more pervasive. And so, if you're going to thrive and survive in this new Wiki world, your organization better be designed with a focus on collaboration. That's a problem for the 19th century management architecture because its prime focus is on compliance. We don't care what your voice is, just do what you're told. That is the fundamental message of top-down hierarchies. In collaboration, everybody's voice is important. Everybody's voice counts. So here we are. We're in a new world with new rules. It's a world that has been transformed by accelerating change, escalating complexity, and ubiquitous connectivity. And the best organizations in this world are going to be those that are designed to move fast, think and act holistically, and focus on collaboration, while most organizations still today are designed to move slow, are functionally fragmented, and are clearly focused on compliance. No wonder so many managers today feel completely overwhelmed by what feels to them to be an unmanageable state of affairs. Well, at the same time that they're feeling this, there is this small but growing group of vanguard companies whose business leaders are thriving in this time of great change. They are growing faster than any businesses have in the history of business. They're adding people to their payrolls. They're generating tremendous profits. People are banging down their doors to work for them, and we hardly even notice them. They are essentially hidden in plain sight. Now, we at Optimity Advisors were fascinated by why is it that most managers and most business leaders are having a heck of a time in this new world, and here's this other group of people who seem to be moving through it with ease. And so we did some research. And when we look closely at what we call the vanguard companies, the companies who are thriving, we noticed that they had 5 disciplines in common. 5 disciplines that were the foundation for their management model. We noticed their management model was completely different from the one that we've been using for well over a century. The 5 disciplines that they're organized around are rarely, if ever, practiced inside traditional organizations. But they are the lifeblood of what makes the vanguard companies work. We call this new management model Wiki Management, management for a wiki world. The 5 disciplines, the first of them is understand what's most important to customers. Now you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, I thought you were going to tell me something, earth-shaking here. I mean, you ask any CEO, they're going to tell you our customers are our most important people. And you know what? You'd be exactly right. That's exactly what they're going to tell you. The problem is they don't have the processes to back up the sentiment. When traditional business leaders tell you the customers are the most important people, it is essentially lip service. It's a platitude. If your customers are your most important people and you mean it, your processes are designed to be such. One of the first things we notice about the vanguard companies is that they have changed the fundamental purpose of a corporation. If you're of my generation and you went to business school, first day, Business 101, first thing I learned, the purpose of a business is to create shareholder wealth. The leaders of the vanguard companies say, no, it is not. That is not the purpose of a business. The purpose of a business is to create customer value. Now, I'm not saying that shareholder wealth doesn't matter. I happen to believe it does. I endorse the idea that we compensate people for delivering shareholder value. What I am saying is that's not the purpose of a business. Shareholder value is the reward you get for fulfilling the purpose of a business. So to think you can make a beeline to shareholder wealth, well, what are you going to do? You're going to start manipulating financial numbers that may have nothing to do with reality. It's a short-term fix that could result in long-term death. The leaders of the vanguard companies don't focus on the bottom line. And the irony is, on average, they're more profitable than their traditional counterparts, because they know if they're continually creating customer value, the profits will be coming from behind. And so that's where they remain riveted. Now, to give you an example of a company where customers are really important, and it's not lip service, the European company Lego demonstrated this a few years back. They had created this online application that they were really excited about called Mindstorm. They'd spent a lot of time writing the programs, and they put it out there in the marketplace. And after about 4 weeks, somebody hacked into the program and completely rewrote it. They had a terrible security breach on their hands. Imagine if this happened in your company. Well, when they got together to decide how we're going to handle this security breach, they noticed two things. The first one was the person who hacked in wasn't an enemy. It was a Lego loyalist, somebody they knew. The second thing they noticed is hacking made the program a lot better. So their solution was, instead of closing the breach, they opened it up. And they invited all Lego loyalists to help co-create Lego's products. What better way to understand what's most important to your customers than to make them co-creators of your products? And by the way, if they co-create your products, do you think they're going to the competition? Do you think you'll ever be out of touch with what's important to them? Do you think you'll be able to manage at the pace of change? It's a brilliant strategy. 120 in-house programmers supplemented by 100,000 customers. When you understand what's most important to customers, this is another difference about the Vanguard companies. You walk into the traditional company today and say, tell me, who is in your organization? They're going to pull out the org chart. Okay? Here's who it is. You go in and ask the Vanguard companies, who are members of your organization? They'll say, well, we're really not sure how many they are. They include our employees, our partners, our suppliers, and our customers. They have an entirely different concept of what is an organization. So you live in a hyper-connected world. Your organization is not about who's on your payroll. It's about every human being you're involved with as you do your work. The Vanguard companies think and see the world very, very differently. Another example of a company who is serious about understanding what's most important to customers is perhaps the company that has the finest reputation in the world for customer service, and that is Zappos. Zaz Lamar is a woman who really was very close to her mother. Her mother, unfortunately, had developed cancer and was in the later stages of cancer. And if any of you have had friends or relatives who've gone through cancer, you know there can be a tremendous amount of weight loss, and that happened with Zaz's mom. Zaz's mom loved shoes. She wanted to do something special for her, but she had no idea with the weight loss what size shoe she would wear anymore. She wasn't even sure what styles her mom would like. She calls up Zappos and says, I'm going to order 18 pairs of shoes in all kinds of sizes. They said, fine, no problem. Sent the shoes along, and fortunately, 2 of the pair worked. So Zaz called up Zappos and said, I'd like to make arrangements to return the other 16 pair, and they said, fine, and those were done. Well, after a while, Zappos noticed that the shoes didn't come back. So they called up Zaz and said, Zaz, we thought, are you running into difficulties returning the shoes? And she says, as a matter of fact, I am. She said, after I ordered the shoes, my mom unfortunately took a turn for the worst, and she has passed away. Did the people at Zappos say, well, you have an obligation to get those shoes back here because you made a deal? They said, no, of course you don't have time to bring them back. Zaz says, it's funny, I'm running around with them, they're in the trunk of my car. So the customer service person at Zappos says, you're in your car? She says, yeah. If we gave you a call, could you take 5 minutes and we'll send a truck to your car? She said, you would do that? She said, absolutely, you have better things to do. This isn't what made the story go viral. What made the story go viral is the day after the shoes were picked up by the UPS truck, another truck comes. This time not to pick something up, but to drop something off. It is a bouquet of flowers from your friends at Zappos, thinking of you in your time of need. Understand what's most important. That made the story go viral. Do you think that Zappos got more back in publicity than whatever they spent on those flowers? And the thing is, they didn't do it for the publicity. They had no idea that it would go viral. It is the ethic of their company. Think about it. Any company that can make the sale of shoes into a tremendous customer experience is really onto something. That's what they do. But when most of us think of Zappos, it isn't shoes that comes to mind first. It is this incredible dedication to customer. And to top it off, when Zappos got successful, Tony Hsieh had the traditional board of adult supervision that venture capitalists like. And the adult supervisors on the board were telling him, you know, we're looking over your financials. We love the success that Zappos has. It's just terrific. But you're spending a lot of money on customer service. And you need to get that down. You need to cut those costs. And Tony Hsieh says, no, we're not cutting those costs. That's what's driving the top line. You're looking at the wrong place. Remember I told you they look at the top line, not the bottom line. Well, the board was adamant. Nope, you need to understand, get those costs down. We can generate more profits for the business. Hsieh said no. And he was so serious in his no, he went out, he raised $200 in the marketplace, and he bought out the board. Because there was no way he was cutting those costs. And then Zappos sold themselves to Amazon. And Jeff Bezos wanted to emulate, not eliminate, the way Zappos treats its customers. That's what it looks like when you understand what's most important to customers. It's not lip service, it is processes that back up the sentiment. And you see this all throughout the vanguard companies who practice Wiki Management. On January 2nd, 2001, Larry Sanger met his good friend Ben Corbett for dinner in a small Mexican restaurant in San Diego. Ben was moving to Southern California to accept a new job. Larry had moved there about a year earlier to become the editor-in-chief for a new online venture by the name of Nupedia. And over the course of the dinner, Larry was telling Ben what a difficult time that they had had at Nupedia. You see, despite the fact that they had hired an incredible group of academic experts, put in place a sterling example of the 7-step review process that every good encyclopedia should have, at the end of the first year, they had somewhere around 20 articles. At this glacial pace, Larry said to Ben, this new online venture will be ready for prime time at the start of the next century. Larry probably wondered out loud if he'd made a bad career move to go into this Nupedia thing. Well, as Ben empathized with his friend, he said to him, have you ever heard of the Wiki website? Now, you all know what that is, but Larry looked at him and said, what the hell is a Wiki website? So Ben explained to him, well, it's this application out there on the internet that software developers use. They pool their collective knowledge, they write all kinds of common staples, and they're quite prolific. So Ben suggested to Larry, this might be the solution for your online venture. Well, it sounded like a good idea to Larry. The next day he goes running into his boss's office. His boss is Jimmy Wales, tells him all about it. Jimmy says, you know, I heard about this Wiki thing. Let's go ahead and try it. So on January 10, 2001, the Wiki software is integrated into Nupedia, and the academics go ballistic. They say there is no role for the masses in so scholarly an effort as an encyclopedia. They are outraged and they are insulted. They say, we are highly educated, highly trained professionals, and we will have no part of rabble-rousing with the crowd. How dare you ask us to do that? They're so vehement in their objections that Jimmy Wales throws up his hands and says, okay, okay, you win. And believe it or not, 5 days later, January 15, 2001, the Wiki software is removed from Nupedia. The academics are pleasantly pleased that they have defended the honor of professionalism. They have maintained the standards of scholarship. Jimmy Wales, he's not so sure. He still thinks this wiki thing is a good idea. So he says, you know, I'll let the academics have their Nupedia. I'll just start a second venture, which Larry quickly dubbed Wikipedia. And you all know the rest of this story. None of us have ever heard of Nupedia, and all of us are using Wikipedia. Larry Sanger, Jimmy Wales make an incredible leap to extraordinary performance, because they had a lot more than 25 articles, I can tell you that. They probably got that in the first day. They make this incredible leap to extraordinary performance because they stumble into the second discipline of Wiki Management: aggregate and leverage collective intelligence. This is also a game changer. The fundamental assumption around which the 19th century management architecture is built is that the smartest organizations leverage the intelligence of their smartest individuals. That is why we build command and control structures, because the theory is the smartest people rise up the ranks to the top. And if the person at the top is a supposed smarted person, and they have the authority to issue directives and to expect compliance with those directives, then we make the whole organization smarter than it otherwise would be. And you know, this was designed at a time when the average education of a worker was below the 8th grade. It's a little bit more than that today, all right? We got a lot of highly educated people coming into our organizations. It worked for a while, but not today. We are in a new world with new rules. And what the Vanguard companies understand is the smartest organizations don't leverage the intelligence of their smartest individuals. They leverage their collective intelligence. Now this is a hard one for us to get our hands around, because we have all gone through anywhere from 16 to 20 years of socialization in an educational system that thinks collaboration is cheating and can get you thrown out. That intelligence is fundamentally an individual phenomenon. Time magazine, when it picked the person of the century for the 20th century, Albert Einstein, perhaps the epitome of the smartest individual who ever lived. And in the 20th century, that's what intelligence was about. I would venture to guess at the end of the 21st century, when Time magazine decides who is the person of the century, it will be human collective intelligence. It is, in every organization, there is this incredible asset, this collective intelligence. It's already paid more. Doesn't require any more monetary investment. It is the most untapped resource in most organizations. It is the lifeblood of the Vanguard companies. Now, if you're having trouble around this notion of collective intelligence as being powerful, let me cite for you an incredible example that happened in the summer of 2011. There was a problem in AIDS research that had baffled the world's best scientists for 10 years. This is a major obstacle. Get past this, we can take AIDS research to the next level. All the world scientists are working on this. Nobody is making progress. Professor out at the University of Washington, a few years earlier than 2011, had set up this online community called Foldit. And Foldit was for people who liked biogenetic problems. And here's the thing, there were no requirements for joining Foldit. You didn't have to have a degree. You could be a smart person who couldn't afford to go to college, who maybe is working as an auto mechanic, but you just happen to like it. You're welcome. Heck, if you're just a mechanic and like it and have no understanding, you're welcome too. Anybody could join. So the professor decides in the summer of 2011, you know, we've been working on this thing for 10 years. Why don't I throw the problem out there to the folded community? It really lent itself to an online game. You know, you got all those pictures, you've seen pictures of jeans where this is going in and so forth. So he throws it out there, and an amazing thing happened. The folded community solved the problem in 10 days. What evaded our smartest individuals for 10 years gets solved by collective intelligence in 10 days. That is the power of collective intelligence. When Larry Sanger and Jimmy Wales are leveraging individual intelligence, they're producing 25 articles a year. Now that they're leveraging collective intelligence, they have millions of articles. And despite the protestations of the academics, the error rate at Wikipedia is statistically insignificant compared to the Encyclopedia Britannica. But here's the thing, Wikipedia's errors get corrected within hours. If the Encyclopedia Britannica, when it did written versions, you had to wait till the next year to get the error corrected. This notion of collective intelligence is an incredibly powerful asset. One last example, one that's near and dear to everybody in this room. It's become part of our everyday existence. In 1998, the last thing the world needed was another search engine. For those of us old enough to remember, we had names like Legos and Alta Vista. Remember those? Right. If you do, we're all in the same age group. But anyway, and if you were a bit person, your money would have been on Yahoo. Why? Because Yahoo had the best editorial experts. And how did you rank pages in 1998? Editorial experts. We leveraged individual intelligence. Along comes Larry Page and Sergey Brin in 1998. They look over the landscape and say, you know this internet thing? It's going to explode. And over the next 10 years, there'll be more pages than editorial experts could ever keep up with. What do they decide to do? They decide that they will rank the pages based upon the wisdom of the crowd. And so they design PageRank, a rather elaborate algorithm. But what is this algorithm doing? All it's doing is tapping into our collective intelligence. And we responded accordingly. Within a very quick period of time, the last search engine in dominates the market, a position they haven't let go of for almost 2 decades. Sergey Brin, Larry Page make an incredible leap to extraordinary performance because they make the notion that nobody is smarter or faster than everybody the fundamental operating system of their company. But they didn't only design their search engine on the basis of collective intelligence. They built their organization to mirror their search engine, which is probably why Google today is the #1 company of Fortune's best companies to work for. When you leverage collective intelligence, you're telling all your workers, all your voices count. If everybody comes to work and feels their voices count, your company's going to be #1 on that list too. Only in their case, it's not a platitude, it's an operating system. The third discipline of Wiki Management is build shared understanding by bringing everyone together in open conversations. This is one that I personally learned firsthand when I served as the Chief Operating Executive of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program, which I did between 2002 and 2007. In early 2002, we were putting in a new claims processing system. If you know anything about health insurance, the claims processing system is the operating system. If it goes well, customers have a good experience. If it goes badly, it can be a nightmare. Like I say, we were putting this in 2002. The last one we had done was in 1985. The life cycle at the time was about 15 years. We got 17 years out of that one. We took it for everything we could because it was very unpleasant putting in a new claims processing system in the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program. Because you see, FEP, as we called it, was not an integrated, vertically integrated business. It was a business alliance of 39 separate companies. So when we did a systems conversion, it wasn't one system conversion, it was 40 concurrent system conversions. The 39 partners, and the 40th was the central processing center. In 1985, when we had last put in the new system, we had a year's worth of customer-facing issues. We were not looking forward to 2003. On May 8, 2002, I will never forget that date because it is still to this day the very worst day in my professional career. I walked into the office on that Wednesday morning to be greeted by two executives who let me know that we had run the first major parallel test of the system, and it was an absolute disaster. 2003 was looking really lousy. I had just become the chief executive of the business, and I said, well, this is either gonna be a short job, or or my worst year is gonna be this, it'll get better from here, one way or the other. What was so problematic for us is, we knew the whole system didn't work, but we had no data about where the problems were among the 40 organizations. We just knew that when we put it together, it was a disaster. How were we going to turn this around? We essentially couldn't put together a plan. Turned out that was an asset. So we decided to do a couple of things, but one that was really important is we decided that we would hold what we call town hall conference calls every Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, actually Northern Virginia, but working in Washington, D.C. And I told the staff, I said, let's just get all the problems out there, and this is going to be really, really ugly. Defend nothing. If they tell you we got a problem and we don't, describe what we're doing and say, hey, would that work? And if they say yes, thank them. No defensiveness, okay? We need everything coming through we can. Because I said to them, it is okay to be a mess in May. It is not okay for us to be a mess in December. So every Friday we had these 2-hour calls, and anybody in the 39 organizations could join. There was no restriction. It wasn't for this level. You want to be there, you be there. Now, we had intended these to be for the systems people. Because, you know, though you work in systems all the time, you know that the first day you start a project, the business people are there, the systems people are there, and the business people swear to you, they'll be partners with you right to the very end, and then they stop showing up at the second meeting, and then come at the final meeting, and when you present and give them everything that they asked for, they say, oh, this is terrible, I didn't ask for this. And it's exactly what they did. And it's very frustrating for you. Because the world changed between here and there, and as much as you tried to engage them, they had more important things to do. Well, you can imagine our surprise. About 3 or 4 weeks into these calls, a funny thing happened. Business people started showing up. We were stunned when we got behind that. Why the business people coming? Well, they said the word has gotten out there. Hey, you got to come to these calls. There's really good stuff happening on these things. All right? So what did we wind up doing? We wind up creating this weekly dialogue between literally hundreds of business and IT people all over the globe. We're not worried about directing it. We've created, in effect, a community. These people start talking to each other offline, and everybody feels like their voice is heard. And all of a sudden, problems start getting fixed. By the time we get to December, we're pretty comfortable. You know, this is probably going to be all right. We'll probably have the normal level of issues that we would expect. But we probably found a way out of our disaster. By the way, without any plan, okay? This just emerged through the conversations because we couldn't do a plan. Well, imagine our surprise. On January 1, 2003, we throw the switch on this new system, and we did not have one single customer-facing issue. There are probably no more system challenges, greater system challenges, than putting in a healthcare claims processing system. Because we do have millions of moving parts. We were flabbergasted. There is nothing as powerful as getting everybody in the same room at the same time to build a shared understanding. And that's what we did every Friday afternoon between 2 and 4 Eastern Time. The great driver of reliability and consistency and performance is not control, it's shared understanding. And so the leaders of the Vanguard companies, when they walk into work every day, they are not walking in with the mindset, now what can I do to amass more control? Because every executive leader in the traditional organizations walks in every morning with that thought, what am I going to do to amass more control? Because nothing is going to be done right unless I'm directing it. They think leveraging individual intelligence is still it. When I walked into work every day, my mindset was, what am I going to do to expand the shared understanding of everybody in our business alliance? Because that's what's going to make me look good. It ain't about control, it's about shared understanding. It's about directing processes that bring people together, that connect them so they all can learn each other. That's what a learning community looks like. And so in one way, shape, or form, you've got to bring people together. Another example of this happens also, by the way, every Friday afternoon. Takes place in Mountain View, California. If you're not at the Mountain View location, you can web your way into it. It's at Google. It's called TGIF. What happens during the week is anybody in Google can put forward questions that they want to ask the three leaders, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Eric Schmidt. And when those questions come in, they close the questions and then they send them out to all the people and say, which ones are important to you? You see, Google believes in understanding what's most important to customers, and they treat their workers like their customers. So what are the questions that are important to you? And the uncomfortable ones are usually the ones that rise to the top. And Page and Brin and Schmidt are on the hot seat every Friday afternoon to answer the questions that are most important to the employees. That's one of the ways that they help to build shared understanding. The fourth discipline of Wiki Management is focus on the critical few performance drivers. Most traditional organizations are focused on the absolute wrong numbers. They're focused on the numbers that matter most to Wall Street. Interesting, we were talking about Google. Google, when it went public, told Wall Street, when you show up for the quarterly calls, you'll be there by yourself. We're not coming. Everybody said, what do you mean you're not coming? Everybody comes. They said, we're not coming. Because we're not here to please Wall Street. We're here to please our customers. What's also interesting about Google, who is the customer they're pleasing? Every single one of us.
Right.
None of us pay them a dime. But we are the focal point of everything they do. Because they know by pleasing us, that's their pathway to shareholder wealth. Which is another interesting thing. How many companies focus on customers who pay them nothing? Different way of thinking about a business. Well, anyway, so you're not, now, am I saying earnings per share and profit and loss? Just like I said before, no, these things count. I do think you measure performance because results matter. If we aren't making money, we'll go out of business quickly because money to a corporation is like blood to a human body. You do need it to survive. It's just that we're more than blood, okay? I mean, if we have a vat of blood, that's not going to be a human being. So just don't go after the blood, all right? You need the whole thing. The numbers that count are the performance drivers. They're the things that drive outcomes. They're leading indicators. And what businesses need to do, and I think we should do this in every project, what are the 3 or 4 most important drivers that will let us know whether we're succeeding or not? And then you measure those and you broadcast them all over the place because people should be able to independently know whether we're winning or losing. Leading indicators let you know that. Leading indicators sometimes take work to discover. They're not always intuitively obvious. And sometimes you'll have to tap into the collective intelligence of people to even identify them. When we went through this exercise when I was in Blue Cross Blue Shield, our most important leading indicator was a number we weren't even measuring until we identified it. And it was a number that I had to explain to my boss what it meant. And it was the most important number of the business. We called it the net active ratio. And you're thinking, yep, that sounds like something you probably would need to discover. What the hell is a net active ratio? Well, it was this. Every month, people came in and came out of our business. We were a $19 billion enterprise. We were literally the largest privately underwritten health insurance account in the country, covering 4.5 million people. We needed to maintain about 3-4 months of reserves to be able to handle the volatility that can come with that size. If we waited until the reserves went negative, we would have few options. We're already in deep trouble. The net active ratio says in the past month, how many of the new people that joined us were active as opposed to retirees? Because active people use less benefit than retirees. Now, basic population was 50-50. And we were pleased with that. We were pleased that the retirees liked us as much as the actives. But that delicate balance of 50-50, the whole thing is you gotta keep your rates stable. That's a hard thing to do. That's the big challenge of being an insurance executive. Keep those rates stable so you can serve the entire population. Well, if our net active ratio was 95, so 95 out of every 100 people came in was an active subscriber, that said, hey, our ability to maintain rates is going to be good. The reserves are not going to get depleted. And now the important thing was if that number had dropped, say down to about 60, we would have known long before we ever saw it in the reserves. And we could begin to ask ourselves questions. What do we need to do differently? Now here's another difference between the wiki world and the traditional world. 30 years ago, when something went wrong in the company, the solution was, and we had a great name for it, corrective action. That was the only action that needed to be taken when things were wrong. What's the corrective action? The traditional leaders who remain focused on corrective action may correct themselves right into corporate death. Because the most important decision CEOs have to make today, and this is critical, and this is why leading indicators are so important, when something is going off track, do I need to correct or do I need to adapt? Because making corrections in a dead model makes no sense. If your business is totally focused on cutting costs as a fundamental strategy, what that means is you are working on a business model that's dying. And no amount of cost cutting will bring it to life. You are just prolonging its death, which is why the vanguard companies don't focus on cost cutting. They focus on value creation. And so if they see that they're running into trouble, their question isn't, oh, we got to go cut the cost. Their question is, how are we missing value? And what do we need to do? Do we need to kill this product and do something else? One of the vanguard companies that shall remain nameless, when they see that a product is dying, they triple the price. They don't cut the costs. Now, the reason they triple the price is they know that there is a core group of die-hard customers who love the product that will pay 3 times the price while everybody else is leaving it. And then they manage its death, getting the last amount of value they can. It's a win-win. Those who are getting it see the value and they're drawing it. But they're not cutting costs to remain popular for all kinds of people. So you have to recognize today, business models don't last 30 or 40 years anymore. One of the practices that I've read about in Google is when somebody comes up with a new product and puts it out there, they go to another team and say, your job is to kill that product and get working on it now. Because Google understands that product's going to die someday. And we're the ones who are going to replace ourselves. In the industrial age mindset of business, you never cannibalize your best products. In the Wiki world, yes you do, because somebody's going to cannibalize them, so it might as well be you. There's no such thing as a sustainable competitive advantage anymore. Economies of scale is no longer about efficiency. It's about learning. Efficiency is something you do to business models that last 30 or 40 years. What efficiencies are, they're no longer faster, cheaper ways of doing things. Efficiencies become new and different, value-added delights for customers. You focus on value, not on cost. This is a major change between the old world and the new world. An example of a really excellent performance driver, leading indicator, is probably the number one number that's most important to the largest number of companies in this Vanguard group. And by the way, the Vanguard group includes companies such as Amazon, eBay, Valve, Google, Morningstar, Threshold, Spotify is in there. And in addition to companies, there is this community of practice that is in this space called Agile. You are there. You are practicing this model. This is your ethic. You're focused on what's most important to customers. Your processes are designed to aggregate and leverage collective intelligence. You're very much focused on driving shared understanding, and you want to get into all the leading indicators you can as fast as you can. You're doing it. One of the things that I would ask people in this room to think about, will you be ready to lead your business if your time comes? Because we are on this threshold, and we are moving rapidly, and the vast majority of business leaders today are unprepared to lead networks. Because the new management model is not a top-down hierarchy, it's a peer-to-peer collaborative network, and it takes an entirely different set of leadership skills to lead a network that does a hierarchy. But you already know that. I don't have to tell you what the leadership skills are. You already know what they are. Now, my question to you is, are some of you who would be in a position able to take that out of the software world and move it into the general management space? Because there is going to be a solid need for leaders who know how to lead networks and know how to lead alliances and know how to lead when they do not have command and control authority, because that's the new world of business. The measure that is most important to the Vanguard companies is called the Net Promoter Score. If you're not familiar with that, I mentioned it, but yes, most of you have been on the side as customers where you've run into that. The Net Promoter Score is simply this. It's a number that was created by Fred Reichheld of the Bain Consulting Company. And Fred said, just ask one question. That's all you need to do. You don't need all of it. Just one question. You don't need 50 million. The one question is this. Would you recommend our product or service to a friend, family member, or colleague? They don't ask you, would you use us again, because you have lower standards for yourself than you do for your friends, family members, or colleagues. All right? That's why they ask it that way, because you put you in that frame of mind, and it's a much higher bar. The Net Promoter Score, and it's always a 1 to 10 scale, if you notice. The 10 scales have become very popular. 9 and 10, you grab those, compute the percentage. You throw out the 7s and the 8s, take the 6 and belows, and compute that percentage. Subtract the percentage of 9, take this percentage of 9s and 10s and subtract from that the 6 and belows. That's your Net Promoter Score. Theoretically, you can have plus 100 if 100% of the people rated you 9 or 10, or theoretically, you could have minus 100 if 100% of the people rate you 6 or below. So a Net Promoter Score of like 40, 45, 50 is probably a pretty good score. Zappos score is in the low 80s. That means that about 85% of the people rate them 9 or 10, and about 3% of the people rate them 6 or below. 85 minus 3 is 82. Every time Zappos looks at its Net Promoter Score, it has a window into how the financial results are likely to be. Because if you have a score of 82, you don't have customers, you have worshipers. Okay? They're not going anywhere. This is the most important number to the Vanguard companies, not the earnings per share. But here's the irony. They have better earnings per share on average than companies who are focused on the earnings per share. That's an example of a leading indicator. If Tony Hsieh walks in one day and finds out our Net Promoter Score has dropped down to 50, he can get people together right away and say, we got to get on top of this, we got to get behind this before this spreads. And then they can do something to turn it around. It will never hit the bottom line. Management's job is not about doing things when they're broken. It's about preventing them from ever being broken. It's about taking the adaptive or the corrective action as necessary. And you better be taking adaptive action rather than corrective action if that's what you need to do. In 1958, a middle-aged engineer by the name of Bill Gore walked away from a 17-year career with one of America's finest companies, the DuPont Company, to literally start a business in his basement. He wanted his business to be very different from the one he just left because he noticed when he was at DuPont, the best conversations happened in the carpool, when people got away from the chains of commands and the hierarchies. So he had a clear vision for what he wanted his company to look like. He wanted it to be like the carpool all day long. He knew the only way he could do that is if no one in his company, including himself, the founder, could have the authority to kill a good idea, keep a bad idea alive. And so he decided that in his new company, there would be no organization charts. There would be no chains of command, no protocols for communication. There would be no supervisors because all work would be accepted rather than assigned, and he would use the collective intelligence of his workers to decide what they would do and how they would do it. This is 1958. If Bill Gore worked up to anybody who knew anything about management in 1958 and said, hey, what do you think of my idea? They would have said, you're nuts. Your business will not last a year because how will anything get done if nobody's in charge? Well, it turns out quite a lot can get done. You see, today, W.L. Gore & Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex, other innovative products like Elixir guitar strings, is a company of 10,000 people in 30 countries around the world. It has the distinction of making a profit in every year of its existence. And it is one of only 4 companies that has been on Fortune's list of the best companies to work for every single year the list has come out. Today, with their 10,000 people at Gore, there's still no organization charts, no chains of command, no protocols for communication. There never have been and aren't today any supervisors, because all work continues to be accepted rather than assigned. And the collective intelligence of the workers still decides what they'll do and how they'll do it. This is mind-blowing, because most of us sitting here cannot conceive how can you have a worldwide company of 10,000 people and nobody makes assignments? And then you're telling me it works? They make money and people are happy working there? It turns out the future of management has already arrived. It's been around for over 50 years. We haven't seen it because it doesn't comport with our concepts of what management's about. And Gore was an outlier for about 4 decades. About 10, 15 years ago, they started getting company. Morningstar is a tomato processor in Southern California. It also has no supervisors. The workers decide collaboratively what they'll do. By the way, with that model, they become the #1 tomato processor in the world. Valve up in Washington has no supervisors. And Zappos, beginning next month, will also have no supervisors because they're adapting the holacracy model. How is it that Gore's company worked? Why wasn't this a disaster? He sat there and said, if this company's going to work, I have to handle 2 things. One, I have to make sure people have an incentive to do the right work rather than the wrong work. And 2, I have to have an incentive to make sure that people do more work rather than less work. And so we put in place a simple provision. Everyone at Gore is evaluated by 20 people, and everybody evaluates 20 people. And Gore discovered the most powerful of the 5 disciplines. Hold people accountable to their peers, not to supervisors. When you hold people accountable to supervisors, you have created an army of people, each one of whom has the authority to kill a good idea and keep a bad idea alive. You can't innovate when you have so many killers on your staff. When you hold people accountable to your peers, ideas can flow. Because whether you're perceived as good or not will depend upon whether you produce or not and whether your ideas are productive. The way Gore starts projects and the way they end projects is highly efficient. How do you start a project? When enough people come to the meeting. When do you kill a product? When they start showing up. Because when you know I'm going to be evaluated by 20 people based on what we produce, you're going to work on the right things. You're going to do more rather than less. It's highly efficient, and it works. Morningstar creates colleagues of understanding, and they measure those. So they make agreements. Now, not all of the Vanguard companies are bossless. Most of them are not. However, at Google, the way Larry Page and Sergey Brin make sure no one has the authority to kill a good idea or keep a bad idea alive is the 20% time. And how many companies can you disobey the CEO, disobey a direct order, do not work on that, produce it anyway and get a bonus? You can at Google. And that happened. Larry Page told a worker, don't work on this, is a dumb thing to do. So when he did it, and Larry saw it with glee, and then he looked at him and said, but I told you not to work on it. You smiled and said, yeah, but I worked on it my 20% time. Google has structured things, so not even the founders can kill good ideas. Hold people accountable to their peers. And so if you want to thrive and survive in this new world, you look at the future of management and you see it is not in top-down hierarchies, it's in peer-to-peer collaborative networks. And when you build your peer-to-peer collaborative networks, you build it around the 5 disciplines. You understand what's most important to customers because the purpose of a business is to create customer value. You aggregate and leverage collective intelligence because nobody is smarter or faster than everybody, and we have the technology to just amplify that. You build shared understanding by bringing everyone together in open conversations, because there is nothing powerful than getting everybody together in the same room at the same time, periodically. You focus on the critical few performance drivers, because you're going to manage at the pace of change. You better be looking at the leading, not the lagging indicators. And finally, you hold people accountable to their peers, because the worst thing you can do to your company in a time when innovation is required is to give thousands of people the authority to kill good ideas and keep bad ideas alive. If you would like to learn more about this new management model, Abacon Books, a division of the American Management Association, published Optimity's research in the book called Wiki Management, a revolutionary new model for a rapidly changing and collaborative world. When we began our time together tonight, you probably thought that our thought experiment was nothing more than a mental exercise. By now you know it's for real. We really are all now permanent residents, not of an 18th century agricultural paradise, but of a 21st century hyper-connected world. And so as you sit here and wonder how you're going to acclimate to this new wiki world and its new rules, I ask you to take a real good hard look at the Vanguard companies who are doing it differently. And when you do, I think you will notice that they have achieved levels of organizational excellence that most of us thought was not humanly possible. And secondly, you'll also discover they have created tremendously great work cultures. So as you think about how you'll acclimate, you know, organizational excellence and a great work culture, that doesn't sound like a bad deal. So welcome to the Wiki world. Thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, and this is always the best part of this. So there's a microphone. I think Book TV is taping. No, we want to make sure that we capture your questions on microphone. So.
Okay. Thank you. Very interesting presentation.
Yes.
I guess my question comes from the fact that I can't really control what a group I'm collaborating with does or what my organization does. I can control what I do and what skills I individually come up with. So here I am in that weird world you described. What 3 to 5 things do you think I should focus on as an individual to develop myself that I likely didn't pick up when I was in college?
That's a good question. The first thing is to give up the notion of control. And this is hard. We have been designed to think that our job as leaders is to plan and control. And the vanguard leaders say baloney. You can't plan in a fast-changing time. And I think inherent in the Agile way of working are the dynamics. Iterate and co-create. And so every opportunity you have to expand the space in which you're working, to bring in general managers where they are willing to come and to get them to iterate with you and co-create with you, you will create better results. When it comes to control, Peter Drucker, the day he died at 96 years of age, so he had a full life. But I felt empty because he would never write another thing again. Peter Drucker pointed this out. He said there's a difference between controls and control. Controls are looking to the past, and they're measures of how things have worked and are working. He says control is always about the future. And so, in a fast-changing time, the past and the future are very different. The reason we mix control and controls is for the last 100 years, the past was a proxy for the future, which is why business managers love data. Most executives are experts on the past. And so what they do is, I know the past, I can linearly project it out, and for a long time you could. Not today. If you map out Moore's law, the curve went exponential in 2004. If you start in 1984 when the Mac comes into the household, and then map Moore's law, 2004 is when it curves up, and that's when we began to feel all of this. So if you want your business to be under control, you have to give up the notion, and I know this firsthand, because when I was FEP chief executive, I was very mindful. I can't control this animal and expect to keep my job. The only way I'll get to keep my job is if I give up the illusion of control and I put in place the dynamics that will allow us to iterate and co-create among 40 different organizations. And in enabling that, we will reach a higher level of control than I could ever imagine in my own little mind. And that turned out to be the case. 2002 to 2007 remains to this day the single largest 5-year growth period in the history of FEP, and it's over 50-plus year history. So, and I'll tell you, one of the benefits of managing like this, I just flat out slept better at nights. I really came to believe in the value of collective intelligence. And when we develop processes and tap into that, I felt like I discovered, the great management secret and actually stumbled into it. And so since we were able to access this, we could get 60 people in a room, we made them diverse enough, we had the processes to get into it, and whatever emerged out of that was always what we should do. And then my job as the leader was to clear the path for whatever the group came up with, provided that you tapped into collective intelligence. So this notion of controls and control, give up controls, give up your sense of personal control so you can bring the organization under control. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you, here.
Oh, sorry, here.
Can you comment on how this could be related to government organizations? What you were talking about vanguard companies, probably most or all of them are for-profit companies. So the sort of three views of this would be if somebody's working in a government organization, if somebody is concerned about the legal constraints that the organization has, and lastly, and perhaps most interestingly, if one is a citizen having to deal with such an organization, what you can do to help the organization start taking advantage of this.
It's a great question, and one that I can relate to from my own experience, because Blue Cross Blue Shield is not, is known as a pretty traditional company, and it's got structure. So I think in highly bureaucratic organizations, I think you can bring this model into play if you have the following two conditions, and this is what you want to look for. Do I have enough span of authority that I can get all the people in the business processes in the room? Or do I have enough of a solid network that I can invite other people in the processes so we all together have all the processes in the room and I have willing collaborators? If you have either of those two things, you're halfway there. The other is, are you working in a space that's relatively autonomous? If you have those, you can affect great changes and people will let you, even in a high bureaucracy. When we began to experiment with this, when I was in Blue Cross Blue Shield, I made this observation. I said they tolerate a lot of bad behavior around here if you get good results. I bet they'll tolerate good behavior if you get good results too. And they do. And I think you have to have that mindset. But innovation and this new model, it's all about working as teams. And if you have the ability, either through your span of control or through your network, that you can bring the team together and you'll work together. You're going to create a subculture, but you'll get away with it because you're likely to improve results. Yes, wait for the mic.
For someone who's in transition and is really looking for companies that are, vanguard companies like this, you mentioned obviously some of the really big, well-known companies, but do you have any suggestions for, how to find out if the companies, if the leaders of the company really have this way of thinking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Ask some key questions. Number one, ask them what the purpose of their business is, okay? If they tell you it's to make money, they're traditional minded. If they tell you it's a wow company and we gotta find some way to make that profitable, that's where these people start, okay? I would ask them, how do things get done around here? Don't ask them, I wouldn't ask them the question, do you believe in teams? Because today the answer is yes, teams is motherhood. You want to ask questions that have them telling you, when they describe how they work, you want them bringing up the term team. And when they do that, ask them what that looks like, okay? And if they stumble over what it looks like, it's a platitude. But if they can describe to you, this is what happens here, this is what happens here, and if they can tell you, so-and-so here did something I told them not to, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened, they really are about teams. And I think you want to ask them how they measure success, all right? And if they're not including some type of customer measure there, then those might be three things you could do. Okay. Yes?
Yes, just in terms of the practicality of how to implement something like this, sort of two questions. One is, in terms of the 20 people that sort of evaluate, how does the selection happen around that in terms of, who evaluates who, and how do you avoid sort of gaming of the system on that is sort of one, just the operationally. And then secondly, there's some broader issues like company strategy where, sometimes you have to have a direction that everyone's kind of rowing in to get there as a goal.
Yes.
And then, you can make more money that way and innovate and create lots of innovation around it where people are doing all kinds of stuff. So how do you solve that piece of it of, where are we gonna go, right, if everyone's kind of doing their own thing?
Two really core questions. The first one I'm going to answer. My company, Optimity Advisors, just adopted the Gore model over the past year. And so, and this was a concern, will people game the system by selecting their friends? Part of that is everyone gets a sponsor, okay? A sponsor is not a supervisor, it's a coach. And part of the coach's responsibility is to look across the 15 or 20 people and make sure that it's a good distribution. And the coach has to agree with it. And Gore follows a similar process, okay? The second part of your question, again, was?
It was about the strategy.
Yes,
How do you set
yes,
the direction?
strategy. Now, let's be clear on this. At Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Larry Schmidt, do determine the strategy. It doesn't mean that there aren't some decisions made at the top. But what it is there's a lot of voices in there, and people are free to disagree and point out that the strategy is done. Okay? The problem with traditional organizations is once the strategy is set, if you say it's done, you fire. Okay? In these companies, it's not. The other thing is, and this goes back to my Blue Cross Blue Shield experience, when we did this, we had a process where we could get people together in a room for 2 days, and we would make tremendous progress, and they would come up with a lot of good ideas. I always open those sessions with, we're not making decisions today. All we're doing is processing ideas, but we're going to allow you to process those ideas in the way your voice is heard. That's what people really want. What I discovered in that, they don't necessarily have to make the decisions. They want the decisions made with the broadest voices in the mix. They want to know that their voice was truly heard. And they can even live with a decision that may not be there where they want, but they sit there and go, well, the voices were really considered. And I saw that happen. The other thing about this process is, in the 10 years, I used these processes over 10 years when I was in Blue Cross Blue Shield. Not a single idea that came out of these collective intelligence sessions was ever turned down by the decision makers. Their reaction tended to be, that was really well thought out. Because it turns out when you have the ability to get a microcosm of the business in the room, you use that as your basis, you tap into their collective intelligence, use that as the basis to get their shared understanding, you achieve what we badly need to do as a nation today. And that is to find the widest common ground where everybody can agree and move forward. And quite frankly, we as voters are dying for that. What is playing out in our nation between the two parties gets played out in traditional corporations all the time. Extreme positions that are locked in. What we discovered, especially through our collective intelligence and shared understanding processes, we discovered collective intelligence as an accident. Our purpose was to hold a meeting where there could be no debates. Because I believe debates are fundamentally unhealthy, and there is no such thing as a healthy debate. Debate is the most primitive form of face-to-face human information processing, which will give you the lowest common denominator solution you can get. What we accomplished when we ended the debates and were able to tap into collective intelligence, and these processes are outlined in the book, we achieved the optimal solution that we could. And every time, over the 10 years that I was there, I never had one of those sessions end where I didn't have all 40 or all 50 people in unanimous agreement. And then it translated out to the larger space, because people disagree with decisions when their voice is not represented, and they know something is wrong. And they know that they know something's wrong. If you build something with all the voices, you tap into the wisdom of the crowd, that's when people say, that's really well thought out. And what really well thought out means is you've integrated all the perspectives in a way that works. And when you do that, you have no subterfuge. And that's why we had no customer-facing issues when we put in that new system, because we followed that. That's the power. Our conversations, we lack the processes to do this. When anything happens, we get around a committee table and we debate. The dominant, loudest voices win. They're not the smartest voices. Yes?
Did the creation of all these success stories around collaborative intelligence rely on the vision of the powers that be, or were these self-organized? Would they have succeeded regardless of the, once control was ceded from command and control, would they have self-organized to success?
That's another great question. You're at the heart of things. Leadership matters. I think leadership is more important in this new model than the old model. But the role of the CEO radically shifts. The CEO is no longer the chief executive officer. The CEO is now, and I'm serious about this, the chief enabling officer. And their title should change to that, because the CEO's job is to enable collective intelligence, shared understanding, the network to be as high as it can. That's what Brin, Page, and Smith do in Google. They're strong presence, but they act as enabling officers, not as executive officers. That's what Jimmy Wales does with Wikipedia, or Linus Torvalds with Linux. That's another company in this space. And now, here is the danger. If you do it in a traditional company, and it's done in several instances, there have been a couple of instances in Ford, a couple of instances in GM. When the leader left, it all went back. Because the hierarchy will come in, and like weeds on a lawn, will just take over. So, if you have a divisional CEO, and not the overall CEO doing this, it will probably last as long as that CEO, because they're operating as the chief enabling officer. When you have the overall CEO do it, as you happen in the case of Google, it lasts. Gore lasts because the CEO in Gore has no authority to direct work. So if the CEO in Gore told somebody to go do this, they could laugh and walk away.
How can the wisdom of the collective be so dependent on a single personality?
Well, it's not the personality, it's the system. What the chief enabling officer needs to do, they are the custodian of the system. And until the system has a life of its own, which happens in Gore, I think Google is probably going to preserve this, because I think the system is so in their blood that, when the time comes for Page and Brin to move on, and I think we're seeing it with Apple, okay? I actually think Tim Cook is more in this space than Steve Jobs was. Steve Jobs is he's the last of the heroic leaders, but he's given us the technology, okay, for the new type of organization. And in his organization, he really did create a highly collaborative workplace, and he had that in mind. But he himself was not a good model of the chief enabling officer. So, it shows there's nothing perfect. We're still talking about human organizations.
We have time for one more.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to ask you to explore a little bit more about the top leading indicators. One of the ways I see the Net Promoter Score,
Yeah.
which I understand how important it can be, but basically I see it as, the number of people who are out there spreading the word for you and for your company and have, terrific credibility and so on. So could you talk about how you derive some of the other leading indicators?
Sure. I think a thing to do is, whether you're working on a project, an initiative, or the overall business, get a diverse group of people together, knowledgeable about, let's do it on a project basis. After you've decided what you're going to do, and get them to mind. If we were to focus on 4 leading numbers, what are they? I would say chances are 1 or 2 of them will surprise you. And because leading indicators need to be called out. They're not as readily apparent. That would be my suggestion. But I think that's a discipline. This is a discipline, if you're familiar with Franklin Covey's The 4 Disciplines of Execution, they are very big on identifying your key leading indicators and come up with a compelling scorecard. The most important part of this is not just that you get them, but that they're broadcast so that people can keep score for themselves. If they do that, you won't have to call crisis meetings, because people will handle the problem for themselves. And that's the power of good leading indicators widely broadcast. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ronald.